There are hundreds of basic and alternate recipes in Satisfactory 1.0. Some of them are absolutely amazing, whilst others not so much. So I've made it my mission in Satisfactory to compare every single recipe in the game to inform you guys on what the best and worst recipes are. So welcome to the best recipes in Satisfactory 1.0 series. This video is all about the uranium fuel rod. If we head over to our nuclear power plant, we can see that this thing actually burns at 0.2 per minute, meaning that we can produce 12,500 megawatts worth of power just from one uranium fuel rod when we have a little bit of help with some water. You need water to actually produce power from this. As we can see, there are two methods to make your uranium fuel rod. The basic recipe uses encased uranium cells, encased industrial beams, and electromagnetic control rods, whereas the alternate recipe uses again encased uranium cells and electromagnetic control rods, but this time it uses crystal oscillators and rotors rather than the encased industrial beam. As always, I've laid out both recipes so we can see which recipe is the best one for you. Let's start off with our uranium fuel rod recipe, and for both of these examples we'll be making one uranium fuel rod per minute. So here are the items that we need. Firstly, we need 3 encased industrial beams, which is not too bad at all. This is my favourite recipe to use for the encased industrial beams, but feel free to use whatever you like. However, I do highly recommend using steel pipes over steel beams. This way you save coal and iron, and overall it's fantastic. Moving on, we need 50 encased uranium cells. This is made from uranium, concrete and sulfuric acid, although there is a separate way. However, this method involves quartz and deuterium. I have made an entire video though about the infused uranium cells, so feel free to check that out before this video in case you want a bit more insight onto the infused uranium cell. Regardless, this is the recipe I've chosen because it's very simple to do. You get additional sulfuric acid as a byproduct, and I just find it really simple. The only downside is the uranium. You are using more of it, and obviously uranium can kill you, just like what I mentioned with my last encased uranium cells video. So do watch out for that. The next thing that we then need is our electromagnetic control rods, and these are very important, especially when it does come to uranium and plutonium and anything nuclear related. And that's because our electromagnetic control rods make uranium, plutonium and Ficsonium fuel rods, which are very important power parts towards the end game. Furthermore, you could also make the magnetic field generator, motors, supercomputers and turbo motors, which again all equally are very important. So one could argue that the electromagnetic control rod is one of the most important mid to late game parts in the entirety of Satisfactory. So as you can imagine, I've already got a best recipe video out for the electromagnetic control rods, but I still want to go over what I've done over here, since I've used a slightly different high-speed connector recipe. Starting off though with the stator, and I absolutely love this recipe. Yes, it probably ends up consuming a little bit more iron than your other recipes. However, having said that, the only item you are consuming is iron and water, which makes the logistics part of this recipe so simple to do, and I absolutely love it. But now let's move on to this high-speed connector, because there's a couple different ways you can make this thing, and I've chosen, I suppose, the basic way in regards of quick wire, cable, and circuit boards, rather than silica, which is actually the recipe I prefer. But I've chosen this because it's a lot easier to do for this example. Firstly, we use quickwire, which, as you might have already know by now, if you use this recipe, you save on deuterium because you're using water and copper, which is fantastic. And when it comes to our cable, again, I'm using iron. This is because I am planning a mega iron factory in my playthrough, so you can always use copper here if you want, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but personally, I love using iron wire, since again, I'm already using it throughout my world. And lastly, when it comes to circuit boards, this is the recipe I've chosen. This circuit board recipe does not consume any crude oil. It only consumes copper, which is very easy to find, and raw quartz, which doesn't really require that much anyway. So I absolutely love this recipe. Now let's talk a little bit more about machine consumption and resources required. Firstly, in regards to the machines, we need 1 manufacturer, 6 assemblers, 10 constructors, 13 refineries, and 2 blenders, meaning that we are required to provide 522 megawatts worth of power for this build, which again might sound like quite a lot, but let's just remind ourselves, that we can make 12,500 megawatts worth of power from this thing. So yes, you are consuming 500 megawatts, but you're making 12,000 surplus worth of power, so I would consider that still very, very much worth it. Unfortunately, when it comes to the resources, you might be able to see we are using a wide range of resources, but luckily we're not consuming that much. Firstly, we are consuming 99 iron, 67.6 limestone, exactly 100 uranium, 80 sulfur, 24 deuterium, 28.4 copper, 3.3 raw quartz, which is basically nothing, which is fantastic, and 236.5 water. So again, not a drastic amount here, but it's just a lot of different kinds of resources, which can be a kind of annoying to logistically get together. So that is recipe number 1. Now let's move over to our second recipe, which is called the uranium fuel unit. And again, we are making 1 per minute. For this recipe, we need a couple things. We need the electromagnetic control rods, which I've just talked about. We also need the encased uranium cells, which again, I've just talked about. We also need 1 crystal oscillator and 3.5 rotors. I very quickly want to talk about these 2 items, because I know I've literally just talked about it. But one thing to note is that we are consuming less electromagnetic control rods than our previous recipe. Meaning everything that you see here requires less resources than what we've just seen. Additionally, we are also required less encased uranium cells, meaning we need less uranium, less limestone, less sulfur, and less water. Especially the sulfur and uranium is fantastic to save upon, so this is a fantastic start. However, one thing that we do need that we definitely did not need for our previous recipe is a crystal oscillator. This means you will be consuming more iron, water, and raw quartz. This is my favorite crystal oscillator recipe because it's so easy to make. Literally just make a few iron ingots, divide it into your cable and your reinforced iron plates, then just make a few quartz crystals in your refinery or in your constructor if you so wish, and but there you go, you've got yourself crystal oscillators. It's very, very simple to make. I absolutely love it. The last thing to then talk about is our rotors, and luckily we only need 3.5 of these per minute, and as you can see I've gone with an all iron recipe, and again logistically this is very simple. A few of you might be wondering, why do I keep going with iron recipes like iron wire, iron cable, and then iron pipes? Well, again, it's all to do with logistics. It's very easy to get 1 iron node, which then makes all of your reinforced iron plates and your cable and your wire and your steel pipe and your rotors, rather than having to deal with coal, iron, copper, and water. So I find this so much easier logistically to do, and I recommend it if you want to go with something that's easy to do logistically, and of course if you want to use a lot of iron. You don't have to go with this if you don't want to. However, I find it is massively helpful for me. Now let's talk about the machines required and the resources required as well, starting with the machines. Firstly, we need 4 manufacturers, 7 assemblers, 2 blenders, 12 refineries, and 14 constructors. And in total, we are consuming 543 megawatts worth of power, which is still about 12,000 megawatts worth of power surplus that you can get from this recipe. Now let's talk a little bit about the resources required. We need iron, raw quartz, sulfur, limestone, uranium, copper, deuterium, and water. The exact same resources as our first example. However, how do the numbers compare? Well, let's find out. Our second recipe consumes less iron, less limestone, less uranium, less sulfur, less deuterium, and less water. However, our first example consumes less copper, quartz, and a little bit less power. Of course, it is nice to try and save power whenever you can, but for me personally, I think saving uranium and sulfur and deuterium is better than saving a bit of quartz crystals and a bit of copper. So in my opinion, the best uranium fuel rod recipe is the uranium fuel unit. Because as long as you're making a decent amount of electromagnetic control rods, which I do recommend making, and also as long as you've got a decent amount of crystal oscillators being made and rotors, you should already have a lot of rotors already, then this recipe isn't too bad. Just make yourself a bunch of these encased uranium cells, and you're ready to go. You've got yourself nuclear power. It is as simple as that. If you enjoyed today's video, you'll probably enjoy these other best recipe videos that I've made on the channel. Either way, thank you very much for watching. Before we go, a massive thank you to our channel members, the Bearded Cobra, Jao, Variants, Nicole Still Plays, Asuna, Litormal, Yummy Kill Burns, Chaos Rising, Scott and Hattie, and Mau Mau. If you decide to become a Knight of the Realm for just £2.99 a month, you get access to channel-only emotes, unique badges, and also shoutouts in videos. Memberships are the best way to support my channel, but you don't have to become a member. Even just by watching today's video, you are supporting the channel massively. Here's a couple more videos I've made that you might be interested in. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Have an amazing rest of your day, and remember, Godspeed.